Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Manager tries to crack down on dress code. I respond by wearing yoga pants to work. So I am 34 years old man used to work at a popular convenience store, really popular with a cult-like following, chain years ago. I've always been a bit of a clown but very good at following rules while doing so. After working there a few years and seeing managers come and go, we got in a new woman who was just miserable and really wanted to flex her authority. Shortly after she started, she posted the uniform portion of the handbook in the break room and started complaining about people's attire, but clearly took the biggest issue with girls wearing yoga pants. So me being the petty rule follower, I am combed through the policy and noticed some things in the wording. The rules stated that yoga pants are allowed as long as the ankles flared, and there was no gender designation for these articles. Malicious compliance. I and a friend went to Walmart after work and bought me a couple pairs of flared yoga pants. Now mind you, I'm not a huge guy, but I am chubby and have a big beard. I began wearing them almost every day I worked, and especially if she was working. This infuriated her. I would regularly hear her protests and even saw her go to the annual general meeting and general meeting. Their response was always, "I can't say anything, he's in dress code L." This continued for a month tops before she requested a transfer. But what made it even more fun was trolling weird pervert customers. They would stand at the deli area and gawk at the young ladies working, especially if they were bent over the hot food table. When I would notice this, I would sidle over beside them and give the boys two butts to look at before whipping my head around and making eye contact with them. The level of disgust on their faces filled my heart with joy. Next story. No written notice? No can do. So I work at a major university in the USA. I run a night crew that works a swing shift. Every 6 months or so, upper management likes to have some all-staff meetings where everyone in our department shows up to listen to them talk about how great they are. Overall, pretty big waste of time. First one I ever went to, I was forced to go by my previous supervisor. I had to be there at 10 a.m. for a 90-minute meeting. My normal start time was 4 p.m., so this was a huge inconvenience. The next year, that supervisor had left and I was the new supervisor. I knew another meeting was coming because I had received several emails about it. However, I had read the contract and it's required that any temporary shift change requires 48 hours written notice. So I decide to say nothing. Finally, less than 24 hours before the event, we finally receive our notice. I immediately reply saying that they failed to give us 48 hours notice and we would not be attending. My manager was initially upset because I didn't say anything earlier. I informed him that wasn't my job and pointed to the contract. He eventually gave in and said, "Fine, you don't have to come. Next time we will give you more notice." However, I decided to make this a larger issue. I spoke to the director, who was also upset we wouldn't be attending. So, I offered that we could do a smaller event for the night crew. Long story short, ever since then we now have a separate event at night. Turns out there is far more than just our shop. There are several other groups, including custodians, who also don't have to adjust their shifts. I never intended it to be that far-reaching, but that simple rule saved us a ton of heartache. No one thinks about the night crew, lol. Next story. Don't want to pay overtime, but wants overtime. I've spoken to you many times about the rules on this project, so we do not need to go over this again. 1. You must take any overtime worked during the week on the Friday. 2. You cannot do overtime on the Friday. 3. You cannot negotiate this. We've been over it a million times. I am not interested in discussion. So this is how the discussion with my boss began back when I did support. To give context, this was a 2-year plan of migrating remote sites. It wasn't particularly complicated, but in order to make things smoother, we'd suggested migrating most of their data overnight. This would occur a couple of hours of overtime each week, which the company were not happy having to pay, so they insisted we take time off on the Friday instead. The problem was that 2 hours could easily jump to 4 or 5 if there was a complicated server setup and a lot of data. These were old legacy systems with terrible connections. You had to babysit them and there was zero documentation. 1 week well into the project, the migration at night takes almost 7 hours. I'm in work the follow day, Tuesday, and I'm exhausted, having had about 3 hours sleep. I'm refused the day off as it must be Friday. By Friday I have recovered and I'm looking forward to my 30-minute working day at this point. I roll in, there's been a ransomware incident at the previous week's site. I'm told to go there and help handle it. So I do. I spent my 30 minutes driving to site, call up my boss, hi boss, just clocking off as it's a Friday to take my hours back. Can you send X out here now as it looks like a right mess, see you on Monday? They quickly organized overtime payments for the remaining 23 weeks the project had to run. For your information, I did get told off on the Monday for my attitude, but there was nothing they could do about it. Next story. Don't make others uncomfortable? About 10 years ago, I worked in a team of scientists, which is almost enough to drop the mic right here, when one day our boss told me others perceived me as contemptuous. I was shocked beyond words. I certainly did not feel superior or feel contempt for anyone. I was so flabbergasted I was silent for probably 2 solid minutes. I asked for an example of when something I had said or done gave someone that feeling. He said he couldn't divulge that information. Okay. Then I asked for an example he had experienced or observed himself. He said he had none. I said, since I have no clue what I've done, how am I supposed to adjust my behavior? He said he didn't know. I said, basically then, I just need to not talk? He said he wasn't sure. I knew right then what to do. I am pretty introverted, and as a child I didn't talk for years. I rarely spoke until I was about 13 years old. Got lots of notes from teachers about how quiet I was. I would answer questions when directly asked, but rarely spoke otherwise. So, my malicious compliance in this situation was easy for me. I just stopped talking except when asked a question. I made a point of smiling, showing I was listening, nodding agreement, etc. I was extremely polite and agreeable. Pretty soon some big issues came up that I had specific knowledge about. I knew how to solve them, but no one else asked. A huge conflict came up between 2 of our labs because one group wanted it one way and the other group had a different opinion. They fought and fought. People were having secret meetings in their offices to try to win. And when they finally arrived at the action they chose, it was wrong. In fact, both groups were wrong. And the whole experiment failed. It's important to know no one was hurt, no property damage or anything like that. Just a lot of wasted time and expense on materials. But I never said a word. This went on for 3 weeks. The lab's budget had to be revised. They had to cut travel expenses, which I was okay with because I didn't want to travel anyway. So, no conferences for anyone. This is a big deal for a lot of researchers because it's how we gain notoriety to be able to get grants, among other things. Finally, a colleague asked me why I hadn't spoken for so long, why I was so quiet. Was something wrong? I explained about being told others perceive me as contemptuous. She had the same expression I did when I was told. She said she didn't believe anyone had said that about me. I honestly was surprised again because I believed our boss. Then she asked me what I thought about the experiment design and why it was failing. I told her about the solution I believed would work, which was actually surprisingly simple. She recognized it had a good chance of succeeding and asked me to share the idea at the next department meeting. At that meeting she asked me again in front of everyone and I repeated what I told her. Several people asked why I hadn't spoken up sooner. I explained I had been given feedback that indicated I caused others to feel uncomfortable. The whole table of colleagues also looked stunned at me. I said I was committed to not causing such bad feelings and couldn't figure out how to communicate because the feedback didn't give me any specific guidance. Everyone looked at the director at that point and he said, "We shouldn't discuss personnel issues." Ha! It was my issue, so I said, if anyone here perceives me as contemptuous and said as much to our boss, that's the reason I haven't been talking. If you don't feel that way about me, let me know and I will stop being silent. Someone else said we needed to hold a vote so there wouldn't be any more confusion or talking behind anyone's back. They voted 100% for me to talk normally and that they didn't agree that I was ever contemptuous. That director slowly stopped coming to work, month by month after this episode, until he was only showing up 1 day a week. Finally, he took a lab position elsewhere and one of my colleagues was promoted to director. And the experiment was a success. The next year, I got a grant to keep the research going and paid for 2 people to be able to travel to the related conference to present our findings. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.